Alright, we're going to start looking at artifacts. The day is cool, the fan does not need to be on, so it won't sound like I've got gale winds in the background. For those of you just tuning in, if you hear background wind, it's because of the fan. And I turn it on when the shop exceeds 90 degrees. Today it's cooler than 90. Okay. You already seen this one. This is in a bag labeled Nolan. So, presumably Nolan points. And in case you're just tuning in, all of these are going to be broken. And I'm not going to be measuring these because that would take forever. I'll measure them off camera and try to assemble a database. You can tell on many of these that there are impact fractures. This one here, definitely impact fracturing. These are rather thick in some cases thin. Now, some of these edges are well developed, some of them are not. Well developed means that it's very regular, very modernish looking, highly precise, precision napping, which can be done with natural tools. Very precise napping can be done with natural tools. But many of these will have crude edges, barely sharp enough to pass as a cutting implement. And most of these in this size will be projectile points. If it's this wide, this long is the width of my hand, it's pretty much a projectile point, although not necessarily. Some of these can be used as knives, or they started as knives and they were sharpened down and they got smaller and never put on a projectile, just continued to be used as knives. Some of them were put on projectiles in their lifespan, at which they might have started as knives. Some were started as projectile points and ended up as knives. So every possibility is possible. The same with the way they were made. Hammerstone, completely with hammerstone. Maybe not completely, because there's some pressure work on the stem here to produce the shape of the stem. But the blade can be developed completely with hammerstone, or completely with antler, or completely with horn of some sort, or a combination of all three, or something that we're not mentioning, in combination or by itself. So there's no way that I'm going to tell you how these were made specifically and with what tools, or with what tribe, because as we all know, or we should know, tribes shared information, so points are not specific to tribes. In most cases they were shared, or the technology was shared, maybe not the points themselves. All different materials. And we don't know the tribes on a Nolan Point because they're too old to know that. The only tribes we know are the historical references, which is a very small segment of Native American history. Extremely small. I bagged up some of these that were larger and more delicate. And again, if you're just tuning in, I'm not going to tell you it's a knife or a projectile point, although I will give some criteria on what I think will imply knife or projectile point. Like longer lengths imply knives, shorter lengths imply projectile points, although they're both classified as Nolan, mainly because of the way the bases are flaked, the sides of the stems, alternate beveling. Same on this one. This may have been broken in manufacture and it's not a completed point, and it was never used as anything. But it looks like it was broken and discarded. To me, anyway. Why? Because most of Nolan's in the pictures are narrow. After they get used, they start getting more narrow. This is not narrow at all. In fact, it's bulgy. Like a lot of first stage points, points that have never been used, it looks bulgy, and it gets wider as it goes up toward the middle. There's a slight twist to this one, so they weren't always perfectly flat. They would chip in one direction and the same on the other side. It does make it thinner, but then it causes a twist. Some of these appear to be heat treated to me, some of them don't. I can't tell you which ones. Ones with fire damage, obviously they've had heat modification. Why they are fire damaged, I don't know. Many different reasons. Cremation, burial, brush fires, accidental dropping in the fire and you can't find it after that because it's in the ashes and you don't want to go looking around in the hot ashes. And by the time the hot ashes go down and out, the damage is already done. So accidental, natural fires, or cremation burials are just three of the possibilities for heat damage after the fact. Okay, and after the fact means after it's made. Now, heat treating before it's made is an interesting topic that everybody hates to get into because it's much better in many circles to consider all of these raw unless proven otherwise, because that makes them more special. I know I'm confrontational, so I say stuff like that. All right. Why does it make them extra special? You keep saying that. You know why. You know why it makes them extra special, because they're extra difficult to make if it's raw stone, which makes them masters of the universe. If they can make something out of ugly, nasty raw stone, ugly in terms of workability, they are masters of the universe, heroes, and special. Okay. Very thin one here. Does the material determine if it's thin or not? Well, maybe, but this is made of really, really good material and it's not that thin. This is made of material that's not so great and it's thinner. So, I'll leave it up to you to decide that one. I don't know. You got basal damage, it looks like, a little bit. Definitely blade damage and looks like impact of some sort. But no damage to the side notches or the side indentations from the forming of the stem. These are very simple stemmed points as far as technology goes. It's one of the easiest points to make. Some of these bases at the bottom feel a little bit ground. Which is interesting. Some of them don't. That one does not. I don't know. Some of these do. I can't tell on this one if it's ground or not. It does feel a little bit ground. This one does not feel ground at all. So I guess it varies haven't studied Nolan's in particular. I've done more study on Pandales and other points like that. Showy points. These aren't that showy. These are damage after the fact, kind of thin. Yeah, damage after. Fire damage. Looks like severe impact damage. I still need to do tests on impact damage. I got some of this material. It's horrible when you try to nap it raw, but when you heat treat it, it becomes manageable, but not that great. So this looks like heat treated, manageable, but not that great. By the way this was napped. Very steppy. Not for lack of skill, but for lack of good material. This material here is this stuff. Or very, very similar. Yeah. The edges developed on this, but it looks like it's been resharpened at least once. But developed, it's regular and it feels sharp, like it's ready for use. Now keep in mind these edges are usually not very sharp. I got one of these too. Let's see. Where is it? I was napping some stone that I heat treated that's exactly like this. Now I can't find it. I showed it on video just the day before yesterday or yesterday. Oh well. Let's see, we only got 30 minutes, so I don't have time to look for samples, but I've got samples of this stuff, of many of these types of stones. This has got a very good edge, actually. Now, I can't tell if that's an impact. It looks like a chip this way, by accident. Now, can you chip it by accident and still use it that way? Yes. But it looks like this is chipped after the fact. After it was made, this is just an accidental ding. And some of the cortex left on there on purpose because they skinned it. They skinned the outside of this particular stone, it looks like, and used the best quality stone that's just under the cortex, which is a good strategy. Some of the best material in the world, and yet they make very simple points out of it. And yes, I said the world. Some of this shirt is excellent quality. I mean, the best that you can find almost anywhere. A lot of it is what I call crapiola pudding. But a lot of it is primo stuff. Those of you who say the work depends on the quality of the stone are refuted objectively by looking at points like this. Some of these are made of excellent quality stone and they're still very, very simple, where they could have made ornate pieces or pieces of high edge quality at least. But these are just utilitarian. They'll do the job. There's no effort to make perfect pressure flakes on this excellent material. This is excellent material. This is so-so. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like this stuff here. This is variable stuff. I need to heat treat this in order to get it to work right without misery. This might not be heat treated, but it might be. And yet, you know, no effort to make perfect pressure flakes anywhere. There's no steps for the most part, so it's a pretty clean face on both sides. But no fancy flute, you know, just simple thinning flakes. Simple thinning flakes. Whereas they could have, you know, produced really fancy fluting on these if they wanted to. They could have made them super thin. Some of these are, you know, quite thin. But the edges, even though sharp, are not what you would call let's see, what would be a good term for edges that are made extremely well and function extremely well? Exquisite? There's no exquisite napping on any of these. But they could have done exquisite napping on this type of material. But they didn't. Simple utilitarian points. Some of them are quite large. I don't have any of those. Those go for high prices, the large ones, the real ones that are very large and complete. You can make thousands of dollars just on simple ones as long as they're long and complete. The thinner the better, of course. It multiplies. It's a multiplier. Extremely thin is exponentially more valuable in terms of prices that collectors will pay. But look, this is not even symmetrical, and I don't think there's a flaw after the fact. Just pretend it's whole, right? That was the base on this particular piece. The stem. Asymmetrical. In both ways. This side's flatter than this side, where it could have been made flat on both sides if they wanted to. No fancy thinning flakes. There's little steps still in there they could have picked out. You know, they could have picked that one out. I could probably pop that out with my fingernail, but they didn't do it. Excellent quality material for the most part, I think it is. It looks like there's maybe some inclusions, but overall you can see some of the pressure flaking or whatever type of flaking this is. You can run nice flakes on it. But it looks random for the most part, with no real aesthetic goals. Okay, so I'll get over that part. Just in case you're still not convinced that it's objectively untrue that the quality of the material determines the quality of the flaking or the quality of the design or anything else. I put this one in the bag because I didn't want to break this one either. I have this material as well. This is a real bugger to nap. So I heat treat it. It becomes a little bit better. I think I've done videos with it. Some of these stems do feel kind of ground down. Yeah, like this one here. The wrapping area feels ground down. The base maybe a little bit, yeah. But very thick, which means the wood is substantial. The foreshaft, to accommodate a thick base, requires a substantial foreshaft. You know, you need at least a 1/16 of an inch on each side that's wood. It'd be better if it was like an 1/8 of an inch on each side. So let's see. For those of you who are wondering how I analyze these, just the measurement on the thickness of the stem is like 7 millimeters. Now the wood would have to be at least 2 millimeters more. maybe not at least, but it would be desirable. So 7 plus 4 will be 11 millimeters for the diameter of the foreshaft. And I'll just give you a reference. That's wider than this pen. A little bit wider than the pen, which is not too bad, right? It had to be at least that wide to make a strong haft. That's how it'll be this wide. So that's pretty reasonable for this direction. You know, the foreshaft can be up to as wide as the stem, but not much wider, because that wouldn't make any sense. This is 17 millimeters wide. Anyway, I don't know the averages on these. What is the average stem? But that's how I analyze them. I analyze them according to what the dimensions of the foreshaft would possibly be. 11 millimeters up to 14, I think, is the measurements of the foreshafts that I have actually measured, the real ones, from pictures, from scaled up pictures that are to scale. I've put the calipers on those pictures that are to full scale and measured, and they do range. 11 millimeters is one of the ranges, one of the measurements within the range. Okay. So yeah, these can be projectile points or knives. Although, you know, I tend to think that the wider ones were probably knives, and the more narrow ones, as far as the stem goes, were probably projectile points. But you never know. It could be the opposite. There's no definitive way to know. Not even with use wear. Because even with use wear studies, they could be studying a point that was used as a knife because of the use wear analysis. Results come back used as knife, the computer says. And yet, in actuality, it was a projectile point that was never fired. It was just kept with the foreshaft separate in the kit, in the toolkit, and never used as a projectile point. But that was its intended use, as a projectile point, just never used as such. But it was grabbed every now and then and used to cut stuff. Right? So even with use wear, you cannot determine the intended use or the final use. Because you could have knife use wear and someone could have been stabbed in the belly with it because it was actually an lateral dart point with no further damage done, passed through the body or whatever, and they look at it later on. You swear only as knife. There's no projectile point damage, so that was a knife. Well, not correct, because in the end, it was used as a projectile point that passed through someone's body. So even with use wear, you cannot determine what the initial intent was or the final intent was. Okay. This has a nice twist to it. That's why I wrapped this one. I'm going to wrap them all eventually, right? But I'm going to take measurements. It takes forever to unwrap these. What does it say? Pandales. Okay, that's a Pandale. It's very similar to Nolan as far as the stem goes. But these have twists in them. Impact damage. And yes, impact damage is characteristic of projectiles. Yep. And I see impact damage on all kinds of stuff, not just what appears to be a projectile point by its size. There's big points, you know, hefty big points with impact damage on them, and you wonder how in the heck would they put that on the end of a lateral dart or something. But there is impact damage on big points in some cases. I'll see if I can find one. I may have shown one in a previous video. Just in case you don't know about the search feature in YouTube, you can go to a specific channel and search that specific channel for certain keywords. You can go to my channel and search for artifacts or whatever you want. And I'll probably have a video on it. And the numbers in front of my videos represent how many videos I've been making. I'm up over 1,000. And I've been thinking, what can I do for my viewers for the 1,000th video? And all I can come up with is a different color for the towel. No, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I've shown this one already. This is a true arrow point. These other ones are archaics. These Nolan points are archaic, period. This is, I don't know, I call it woodland period or late prehistoric or something like that. Mississippian. It depends on which part of the country you're in. But late prehistoric, many of these are late prehistoric. Or just prior to European contact. Some of these extended past European contact in the time period in which they were made. The Native Americans didn't switch over to steel right away or to metals right away. They did it slowly. Slowly in comparison to our lives. It may have taken 200 years. That's considered slow in archaeological. No, that's considered pretty fast in archaeological terms, but slow in our terms. So I'm talking in our terms. It took some time to change over. Anyway, this is what they call a Prehistoric point. A large range for this type of point. Many different tribes used it. They call it a Caddoan point, the Caddo people. But many other tribes used it. Nice and thin, high quality stuff. It looks like heat popped. I don't know if that was before or after the fact. Let's see if we can zoom in. Yeah. Some of you with keen eyes can see maybe this was napped after the heat pop. You know, there's a heat-treated flake with a heat pop in it, but they said, it's okay, I'll just make an arrowhead out of it anyway. Or the heat pop happened after. Some of you guys have eyes that are good enough to see which one is it. Did that pop out after it was made, or was it there before it was made? I would tend to think it's after. Not because of what I see, but because it makes more sense to work a piece of material that you know is going to be not dicey, not risky. Something with a heat pop in it is risky because there could be other heat flaws in it. But that doesn't mean it wasn't made that way. So I'll leave it to you to figure that out. The bottoms of these notches were not powdery and crushed. Right? So if you're making notches and you're getting the stalls and the powdery crushings and all that, you're not doing it right. Just saying. The edge work, it feels a little bit sharp in some areas not so much. The whole edge feels right. I mean, feels sharp on this one. And it looks like they made an attempt to resharpen the tip. It may have been longer and it's just damaged. It was never recovered or something. We could study each artifact in depth for long periods of time. But I won't do that. Okay, so that's the 30 minutes for today. There's a couple more in here, but they're tiny. All right, that's it.